Hello and welcome to Off the Track. I'm your host, Corey Crane, and today we'll be discussing all things related to the design of pit displays. So joining me, we have George Stoner.
Hi.
Matthew Fleming.
Hello.
And Peter Russell.
Hi there.
Okay, just a quick little preface. With this extremely dynamic year that we find ourselves in, we should note that all rules that we may discuss throughout this episode may be subject to change with the dynamic nature of the potential for a virtual world finals or your virtual state and national finals, depending on how your country is handling the coronavirus outbreak. But just to kick us off, we're starting with the fundamentals. So what is a pit display?
So a pit display is basically an exhibition-style booth that you put up at the competition event, and it is 3 meters by 1 meter deep at the World Finals. Obviously, who knows what's going to happen this year. It could be a virtual booth, as we've seen in Australia, for the state finals. And basically, it is the forefront of your brand. It is your brand or your team's physical presence at the competition. And it is the main forefront of your brand. And usually it has, bits of it has your car, and it displays your competition elements like your portfolios, any other documents you might have produced for the competition, and it is where your marketing interview is conducted.
Okay, so running on that, George, what, in your opinion, should it achieve?
I think the most important thing for it to achieve is to, as Peter mentioned, is to show off your brand. It's what most people see, and it's what anyone coming around the event looking at teams will see. And it's very important that it shows off your brand, but also your sponsor's brand, as I think for many teams it's a big part of the return on investment to get their branding shown on your pit display along with your team's branding.
Yeah, and I guess actually just running on that, one of the key factors to consider when designing your pit display is how much money you're going to allocate towards it. It should, of course, be noted in the current set of regulations from last year that the pit display is only worth a very small margin of the overall points of the competition. Does anyone have an exact value on that?
It's 6% of the overall points at Worlds.
That's 65 points, isn't it?
6 points out of 1,000. No, 60 points out of 1,000.
Yeah, 60 out of 1,000. Right, okay.
And of course, being worth only 6% of your overall points, a lot of different teams in recent years have taken different approaches in how much money they allocate towards it. So while it may only be worth 6%, most teams, if not all, are allocating more than 6% of their finances towards it to achieve as many points as they can. But in doing so, there has been a very large disparity, I would say, between teams spending and trying to economize their booth as much as possible to really realistically make it an appropriate level of funding for the amount of points it's worth, and then ranging all the way up to teams spending, in some cases, well over 10,000 Australian dollars to produce what, yes, be an absolutely fantastic pit, but realistically, do you need to spend that much to achieve those points?
And not just money as well. People also spend quite a bit of time on the pit display. Probably a bit more than 6% of their time. So it would depend on your situation, but it's something to consider how much effort and time and money you put into the pit display for what you're getting back.
Yeah, and I mean, that's a great point. I've even seen teams who have had dedicated members that spent the majority amount of their time for, say, a World Finals working on the pit display, which, if you've got all other competition elements down pat with all your other members, by all means. But it's certainly an interesting discussion that I think all teams need to be having, especially in this year where sourcing large quantities of sponsorship will be extremely difficult.
And I think it also has like a subconscious effect as well. Even though it's worth a relatively small amount of points, it does have or I think it has a subconscious effect on other judging activities, because the judges will, you know, even let's say like the engineering judges or the judges you don't even speak to, they will, you know, have a look at the event venue, and they will look at your pit display. But it shouldn't, they're not taking into account what's on your pit display. It will have that subconscious effect, your brand. I guess that speaks to the effect that your brand has as well on how you're perceived by judges and other people at the event. So I think it does have a larger effect, not just on the points that you're allocated for the pit display, but also on other activities as well.
Yeah, so with like those secondary benefits, I'll call them, it's sort of more like if a judge is, let's say an enterprise or an engineering judge is tossing up between a 7 or an 8, they might be subconsciously more likely to go with that 8 if you have a nicer brand.
I think it's a nice brand helps a judge feel confident in your team. Have a sort of confidence in what you've produced.
And of course, this all opens up the major question which teams all have when going to begin the design of their pit displays is, are they going to choose a simpler geometry, or are they going to go along the lines, and quite often the more expensive line, of having a full custom pit display? So from this, over the last, say, 10 years, we've seen 4 really identifiable and key sort of design methodologies towards these pit displays. So we've seen F1 style pit walls, so similar to that of, I believe, Pinnacle, and in years gone by, Hyperdrive had something that was very pit wall-esque. And then another approach would be walk-in, so seen by teams like Golden Diversity, where you can really get right into the booth, even though it's, say, 1.5 meters deep, maximizing, I guess, engagement in some regards? Or do teams go for something like a flat front, which teams such as Aurora or Horizon have premiered at previous World Finals, which can be absolutely fantastic when done right? Or do teams go for a full custom booth? So, for example, booths like Infinitude or the IOTA booth. Peter, I'll hand this to you, actually. What do you think is potentially the best route, or can you discuss the positives and negatives for the different design styles?
I guess it depends on the previous point as well, on how much money you've decided to allocate. At a World Finals, I think a custom design will set you apart from the rest. Instead of having, like you said, like the flat front and then just a flat table on top. A full custom is definitely more unique, and you get to build in your brand a bit better depending on the design. What we had for Infinitude was a sort of custom table. So we kind of had a turntable in the middle that was jutting out at the front, and then tables on either side that sort of curved out, if that makes sense. You can Google it and then you'll find an image if you don't understand what I'm talking about. That's the route that we went. But the caveat to that is that it is quite expensive. And in terms of shipping, it's also expensive as well, depending on the material you choose. Can be quite heavy as well. So there's a lot of factors to take in, but I guess the main constraints are time and money when it comes to that.
I'm going to disagree with you there. So I think the full custom is probably a waste of your time and money. When you can probably achieve similar results with either your standard flat front, like you can still incorporate your brand into that, or even a walk-in. I would assume those would be quite cheap because they're usually just posters and a small table. They shouldn't be too. They could be potentially cheaper than a flat front. And there's still plenty of ways that you can incorporate your brand into that while minimizing your costs and time involved. Again, it would ultimately depend on your circumstance and your brand, what you do, but there's no need to go with a full custom. It might just it might not provide you with the benefits that you're looking for.
And with a full custom, you definitely need... We had, one person dedicated to our pit display. So that was, a considerable amount of time we spent on our pit display. Was it worth it? I think so. We were nominated for the best pit display, but ultimately didn't end up winning it. But I think it was a good decision. Could we have done as well if we went for something more traditional? Maybe. I'm not so sure how we would have done it though. But that ultimately wasn't in my hands. But yeah, I guess like Matt said, it is in it's up to your individual circumstance. For a nationals level, I think a traditional pit display would be absolutely fine. But yeah, again, it's depending on your circumstance.
I think also one of the most important things for the pit display is that when it gets finally, when you put it in place at the competition, it has to have a high quality of finish. So if you've gone for something incredibly ambitious and it all doesn't quite line up because you haven't put enough time into what the project requires a lot of time, then it just looks a bit wrong, and it doesn't make everyone think, oh, this team is great.
One thing I've discussed with you, Corey, is sometimes teams will use banners that are quite flimsy, and they end up putting them up, but then the tension isn't strong enough, and you can see all of the creases on their banners, which I think looks a little bit tacky. But a really easy way to fix that is just increase the tension. But that's one sort of element where if you do have sort of flimsy banners that are often cheaper, they can end up sort of degrading your brands just because they look like they're about to fall off the wall.
I think you could probably do that with any banner, really. If you had the tools there to actually tension it, it's quite hard to do by hand, especially if you're just blue tacking it on. But if you have, something to clamp it in and something to tension it, that's something to think about.
So, of course, with the IOTA booth, it was a bit of a hybrid between a full custom and the flat front. And it was certainly not a cheap pit display. We struggled to find someone who could manufacture it for us. We didn't have the capacity at the time. And we found a local manufacturer, and they did an absolutely fantastic job. But as Peter, has been mentioned before, when you get into those full custom designs, one, they get pricey very fast, and two, you are also quite potentially looking at quite a hefty bill for international shipping if we do end up with a physical or a real in-person event this year.
And you're also relying on a external source to actually produce that, and if they don't do it to the specification you want or within the time that you need it done in, that can be a problem.
One more point that I'd add on the design of your display would be factor in, how easy is it going to be to assemble, and also disassemble as well. Can you meet that 2-hour limit? Obviously, we're switching to virtual finals now, so it's probably less of a constraint. But if you do end up competing physically, that is something you've also got to take into an account. But we will probably discuss that in the next episode where we talk about construction.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so moving on to beyond the, overall design approach, more specifics. So spatial design. How do you maximize the flow of the efficiency through your pit display?
So I guess the flow is almost like a form of like channel marketing, where you try to work out where someone's going to look and then lead them on through your design to shape a story or an action. Is generally the purpose of channel marketing, but probably not so much in pit display. You're probably just trying to get them to read a story, but still making sure that your information is upfront, at eye level, the most important thing, you want to be at eye level, and then you can branch off from there so that it really catches people's attention.
Yeah, that's perfect, because realistically, there are 50 or so other booths at an event. You have to be able to stand out from the rest and draw people in, and then once you have secured their attention, run them through, even without you necessarily being there to guide them. It has to flow through all of your engineering and your team and your management, and display all the elements appropriately, showcasing all your documents, or if you've got a nice car display. And it really, as you say, it has to be a story, or it has to have that sequential flow throughout the entirety of the display.
Yeah, and you don't want to put small font in the middle of the back poster, right? That would be your worst solution, right? Because that's where your people are going to look, middle of your back poster. Right? That should be something big and eye-catching. Maybe your logo, maybe your car, whatever you want to do, whatever suits your brand. And if you're going to, have information on your posters, move them off to the side.
Yeah. I mean, this, in my opinion, is one of the major flaws of the front design that we've discussed just previous to this. Because for a lot of teams, they have the front edge or the front face of the booth right at the outer extremity, which, sure, it gives it absolutely plenty of horizontal table space for displaying documents and other items, but it also prevents individuals from getting right into your booth and being able to be fully surrounded. It feels like they're more looking in from afar, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think it definitely helps for people to walk inside at least the frame that you get given, so that they can look around. And I think it encourages people to come into the pit display, and by creating a space away from where everyone's walking around, you create the chance for other competitors, judges, or just interesting guests for you to be able to start a conversation with them, because you're in a space which is dedicated to your team, and the pit display is a really great way of acting as a stimulus for different conversations, like that they might ask about something that's on your pit display, and that can start a conversation.
Yeah, brilliant. So another key factor, especially at international events and national events, is the storage space within your pit. Obviously, for a lot of teams, there's a lot of electronics that have to be in the background, or elements that you might need stowed, especially overnight. For IOTA, our front panel with the big IOTA logo, during, I guess, when we weren't at our pit, we were able to clip those forward and pull off the front panel, and that allowed us access to, one, all of our electronics that were running behind the scenes, but also to stow, say, important documents when we weren't able to be at our pit, which is really important.
Yeah, we had a similar thing for Infinitude. Our lower section was on casters, so you could just drag it out. Then you had a nice little area where we could put our, as you said, like our power boards, all of the cabling for our electronics, and then also there was a box where we could store stuff as well. So that was definitely quite handy to have.
I guess that's the one flaw of the walk-in pit display, is you've got nowhere to store stuff usually. Like, I remember Golden Diversity's pit display, the only space they had to store something was this small little coffee table-like thing at the front of their booth, but it didn't have that much storage space. And if you don't have something like that, then you've effectively got no storage space.
And it's also important to note that you shouldn't be storing anything valuable, of course, in there. Even probably, your documents as well. Just don't put anything valuable in that storage space.
Yeah. It's for tools and, bags and jumpers and things.
Things you can easily replace, not like iPads or documents or anything of value, yeah.
But, I mean, if you've got TVs on your booth, you've got no choice, but that'd also be quite hard to steal.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think Peter brought up a very good point there of the power boards and the electrical cabling. And one very essential key design consideration, especially for teams competing at Worlds, is designing the frame of your booth to not impede on any potentially fixed power points. So for Singapore, 2018 Singapore World Finals, the 2 input power boards that we were given were in a fixed location. So if by chance you had not have heeded the design clarifications given by F1 in Schools World Finals Commission, or F1 in Schools UK, sorry, and you had designed your frame inappropriately, you have to design your frame in essence to not impede on those fixed power points, because if you don't, you may not be able to, one, construct your frame properly, and it may sit one edge up or whatnot, or it just may not go together at all, especially given how little room for movement those fixed booths that you're given to set up your booth in are. So yeah, pay attention to any design specifications given by F1 in Schools UK for especially the World Finals events, and of course at your local events as well.
At our World Finals, we had a big problem with, so the pit displays all had a plug, and the plug was in the middle on the back, sort of lowish down, and it just stuck out of the back of the setup pit display, and loads of teams hadn't seen this in the specifications, and their pit displays just wouldn't fit in because this plug just stopped their pit display going in. So do make sure you look at the specifications.
I think lighting as well is a very, very important part as well of your design. We had LEDs everywhere, basically. And it just gives... There's just a special sort of ambience that it gives your pit display. I don't know what it gives, but it's just a very special sort of vibe and atmosphere.
There's a reason that poker machines have very bright screens. It's to draw your attention. Light draws attention. Sometimes it's not too bright and you go blind. That's not good. Don't do that. But yeah.
Yeah. Especially in these venues where a lot of the time the lighting is quite a yellow. I know in Singapore it was quite a yellow, if not orange light being off-put or output by the event lighting. Yeah, so for our outer pit, we had a strip of LEDs right on the top on the roof, which we'll get to in a second, which were off-putting a cool white light, which, when combined with a lot of white surfaces and nice matte documents, we created a really clean and professional look over teams who were using the stock lights, which, quite frankly, were quite subpar in a lot of cases. Yes, as I mentioned, the IOTA pit had a roof that came right out to the extremity of the booth. It was just a clean white top, but we found it created quite a unique style at the event. We were able to display or have our LEDs running across the top, and it created quite an immersive pit. I believe, Peter, you had sort of a bit of a take on, not quite a full roof, but the lip that your booth had?
Yeah, we kind of had a half roof, or as a lip, as if you put it. That kind of extended halfway across the entire roof section that you get given. And that worked all right. And I think as someone who's 6'4", I don't find the idea of a full roof very enticing, because it just feels very claustrophobic. But I'm sure it feels different for other people. But yeah, I'm not very fond of a full roof.
And this is also probably on the lowest of priorities for a pit display. You should be trying to make people look at your back poster as much as possible. They're not going to be looking up generally.
I think having an upper sort of section gives you more real estate to play with your graphics and posters, etc. But yeah, it's kind of like how many people are going to be looking upwards. But yeah, obviously, what is in front of you is going to be your prime area for displaying whatever that is, which is usually the car. I don't think I've seen anyone else do anything other than the car. But yeah.
One thing we did at Nationals was we had a blank orange floor that was just a piece of nicely painted orange MDF wood that just sat on the ground. And we would have done it for Worlds, but we didn't want to have to carry a big piece of wood with us. But it was just this orange bit below you that sort of didn't take much effort, but made the whole pit display feel a little bit more immersive.
You could get a rug maybe even, or a piece of carpet and use something like that.
Okay, so I guess perhaps the most common use of technology is the use of different screens, monitors, TVs. Matt, do you want to go into that? I believe your booth had quite a number on it.
Yeah, so ours we had 2 Windows tablets, which I don't think are a thing anymore, but on our display as... Oh God, I can't even remember. Did we also have 2 screens?
Yes.
So I know we had 2 tablets, but we have 2 screens on the side as well?
I believe so.
No, I need to...
I like how Corey knows and Matt doesn't. And Matt was, what was it, the tech ops specialist or something?
Look,
it's ICT.
No, I definitely know we did the tablets because I had to build custom holders for them, but I can't remember if we had extra screens or if I'm just mixing it up with...
Shall we toss to George or something while Matt takes a look at that?
We have 4 screens, which actually are also all Windows tablets, which we chose because the school were like, "Would you like these Windows tablets?" And they just played videos, one about our team's ethos, one about our car, one about our sponsors, and one talking about marketing events that we've done. And then below them, there was a short paragraph summarizing each video, just in case you didn't want to spend a minute watching through the whole video.
For Infinitude, we had 4 iPads that were sort of set into our panel at the front, plus a Windows PC, which was touchscreen, and we had a sort of a digital portfolio that people could look through, which was kind of like a modified version of our website. Well, it was a template of our website, which had our portfolio content in it. We also had a Twitter feed on one of them. I can't remember what the others were used for. Something else we did was augmented reality. That was for Nationals. That worked quite well. And we had we had 2 iPads that sat on the sides, and our business cards would allow you to scan them, and then the car would pop out of the business card once you scanned it with the AR app. And that was really, really well received, and people were just blown away with that, which was great.
All right, I've jogged my memory. So, on our pit display, we had 2 Windows tablets and we had 2 TVs. So the 2 TVs were playing 2 separate videos of our competition that we had produced, lead up to competition, that kind of thing. We had a tablet with our website on it. And then another tablet, we had a reaction game that we had developed, thinking Game Maker, and it was basically just like a reaction testing thing. It was set up with a model of the track, and we had 2 custom built triggers. So it was just like doing a reaction race.
And how was that received by people at the event?
People were very interested in the reaction game. Everyone had a go. That was, the primary gimmick of our pit display. The other bits, if someone wants to learn more, that look at the website. I don't really think the videos were that important, though. but they're nice to have to actually grab people's attention, because screens generally seem to grab people's attention. So if there's a video on there, it's nice to draw them to the pit display with that.
So IOTA, we had 2 monitors which were offset from the back wall but still inset in their own paneling, if that makes any sense. And that was connected to essentially, it was a mix of RFID and NFC technologies. So you could, say, pick up a car, any of, say, the 4 development cars on the back wall, and scan that, and that would give you 3 options, with 3 physical buttons all illuminated with LEDs. So I believe you could have, say, an exploded video of the car, an overview of the car, more in-depth analysis, and you could do that for other project elements as well. And it created quite a interconnected sense of interactivity within the pit. There was a lot, if you really wanted to get into the finer details of elements, it was there. If you were just looking for a bit more than surface level interaction, it was also there. Judges really liked it. It worked really well. And honestly, we're quite happy with it. One little additional tip that I'd give in hindsight is with how, not commonplace, but several teams, especially at our World Finals and since then, have used NFC or RFID systems. And so what I would recommend is, by all means, include them. They're absolutely fantastic and can be really effective, but make sure you don't include them in areas such as innovation unless you really have an innovative take on that, because chances are you will not be the only team at your World Finals or potentially at Nationals or State Finals that are using that system. By the competition regulations, you are required to have several different elements displayed on your pit display. So this includes things such as your car. You're not required to have car development, but it's a great idea if you can, along with other official documents such as your portfolios and potentially, depending on your event, prospectuses or even engineering drawings or renders.
So on our pit display, we had our cars from the sort of all the different versions of our team for the past 4 years, sort of set out in a grid going from right to left, all sort of one behind each other, to sort of show the evolution of our cars. And then we also had like a big rendered image of our car on the back wall, as well as showing our portfolios, which we had in a holder on our main table, which we generally were probably a bit lax about just leaving out. We put them all away at the end of the day, but we didn't do too much to hide them when we all went off for our verbal presentation.
On our pit display, we had big render of the car on a back wall, actually on a model of a track. We had a little shelf at the back, would be the best way to describe it, with all of our prototype cars. And in the middle of our pit display, we had on a box at the same height of that shelf a turntable with our final car design, and we also had portfolios and things on the pit display just laying around.
And for IOTA, we had, I guess, the classic big render on the back wall for the car, and then along with the back wall on a raised platform, we had a full range of physical cars showing car development, and then the standard portfolios in the front just flat on the table, and any additional documents such as prospectuses, rendering documents, marketing documents, and engineering drawings were held in clear perspex folders on the sides. So anyone looking for more information, it was all there. I believe, Peter, you mentioned before how Infinitude integrated digital portfolios into touchscreens. Can you go into it?
Yep. So our digital portfolio was basically a website that was stored locally on our PC. So we had a touchscreen PC right in the middle, behind our turntable, and that was a sort of website. It was basically a template of our website, but the content was our portfolio, was taken from our portfolio. And yeah, that's it basically. There wasn't anything fancy with that. And yeah, that was quite well used.
So, as mentioned at the beginning of this podcast, your pit display is the forefront of your branding at competition events. So, one of the, I guess, and we'll break this into two different areas. So, we'll start with your team's branding. So, don't hold out on this. Consistency is key. So, your branding that is exhibited throughout the entirety of the display needs to be consistent with all of that featured on documents, sort of portfolios, or throughout your social media or website. So, George, do you want to go into how you, I guess, demonstrated this consistency and different elements of the graphic design of your pit display?
So, to represent our brand on our pit display, I think the first thing we wanted to do was to get our team colours across of white, orange, and grey. So they were quite bold, and you could see them from a distance. So from a distance, without being able to read anything, you could go, oh, I think that might be a Vol's pit, which I think is quite important, that your pit's recognisable from a glance. Then we sort of have things like we've got our name printed in big letters on our front table, as well as then when looking more into the pit display, we have links to our social medias.
Yeah, with the Infinitude pit display, it was the same thing. We had a very, very heavy use of purple everywhere. And like you said, George, it's to make sure that at a glance, that is, Infinitude. It is that team, that brand. And yeah, it's the colour, really. That was the main thing that represented our brand. We also had a infinity symbol on the lower half. But yeah, it was definitely the colour that made it stand out for us. How about for IOTA, Corey? How did you incorporate your brand into your pit?
Yeah, so again, same on surface level, heavy use of red, white, and black in certain areas, which it creates that surface attraction, and you're able to distinguish it as, say, the IOTA booth. But getting into the actual pit itself, the finer graphical elements. So, say on our back wall, we had, similar to Infinitude, a slant or an angled division on the back wall, which was consistent with the branding used throughout our portfolios and on covers. And then on the sidewalls, things such as like underlining and different finer graphical elements were in line with that used throughout our documents and on our social media. So if you look at our social media, when we lead up to Worlds, all of our posts had a red bar similar, it's close to the bottom, and we used elements such as that throughout portfolios and throughout the pit display itself. Okay, and that leads us into our next topic, which is sponsorship and how you can place your sponsors' logos throughout your pit and different elements. So, I guess Matthew mentioned it before, eye level. So this to me is one of, if not the most important element when you're placing your sponsors' logos throughout your pit, because you want to maximize your ROI, and in doing so, they have to be in a position where you can easily see them, notice them, from not only a distance, but especially when you get right up into the booth. So, George, do you want to talk about how you implemented this into your pit?
Yeah, so we have different locations for different sponsors. So on our main table, on the front of it, which was actually quite low down, we had a list of every sponsor, because that's where we had the room to put everyone. And then on our right wall, we placed our top 7 sponsors, our sort of gold and top tier sponsors. And then we had a description about each of them and business cards that people could sort of take away with them. And that was sort of more around eye level. And then also on our table, we had a section dedicated to our lead sponsor, which was BAE Systems. which sort of had their logo at eye level on the table, and then with a brochure for their company, and then also our interactive BAE Systems Reaction Challenge.
Peter, do you want to take us through how Infinitude represented their sponsors on their booth?
For our sponsors, we put them... Basically, I think we had all of the logos along the bottom, which in hindsight isn't actually the best place to put them. But then, as I mentioned before, we had a iPad completely dedicated to just sponsor logos that was rotating through them. I'll bring up a photo of our pit display. All of our sponsors were along the bottom, and then the main sponsors were on the back wall, such as REA and the Australian Government Department of Defence. We had one iPad dedicated just to sponsor logos. So that's how we represented our sponsors.
Okay, and Matt?
So our pit display had a 45-degree angle on one of the side walls, and on that we had all of our sponsors' logos, with the platinum sponsors being at top closest, I guess, to eye level, and lower level sponsors got the lower levels. I guess it probably wasn't the best placement for ROI, but it probably wasn't the worst either.
Okay. For IOTA, we actually had probably, I would say, at least 30% of our main back wall dedicated purely to sponsors. So similar to Matt's, it was tiered out into our top level sponsors and then a slight gap, and then the lower levels below that. And what I do recall during our marketing, meeting, it was one of the judges noting how they found it was quite a good idea to not necessarily segregate different sponsors into different sections, but to really emphasize your majors. Because in the end of the day, for a lot of teams and for a lot of sponsors, it's quite a lot of financial input from these sponsors. So you really want to be maximizing how much return on investment you can be giving, as we discussed in sponsorship. So our next point is content. So additional items beyond that of your pit display walls and floors that you have featured throughout your pit display. And one major element of this for a lot of teams is merchandise. So for us, for IOTA, we kept it pretty simple. It's just had wristbands. But Matt, do you want to take us through? I believe you had some pretty interesting forms of merchandise for Worlds.
So this was in 2017, and there was a bit of a meme at the time, which was the fidget spinner. We were the first team to do that, although not the last. Looking at you, Ben. And that was actually a really good gimmick. Like, the judges loved it because it was a fad at the time, although a little bit dead by the time of the actual world competition. But everyone found it interesting, and it was fairly relatable. We also had other things like jars of hard candy, which was totally our idea, totally not stolen from Peter at all. And what else did we have? Wristbands and things like that.
Okay, Peter?
From Infinitude, we had merchandise as well. I remember we had pens, candy, hard candy. What else did we have? I can't actually remember. We had merchandise. I can't remember the whole range of what we had. We had USBs. They were quite expensive, so we reserved those for the most, exclusive VIPs that we wanted to present them to. I can't remember now, actually. Pens, I think we had. That's it, I think, in terms of merchandise.
And George, pretty similar, or anything unique?
We have pens, we have mugs, We did have sunglasses, but we didn't have many of them. So we sort of kept them hidden slightly. Kept them out for judges. That was pretty much it. We didn't have loads of merchandise, and I think we should have brought more of each thing because it does usually all get taken.
Okay, and on that sort of notion of hindsight, what does everyone think, in their opinion now, having not only competed at a world event but seen other teams and seen what they've done? What do you think would be the best examples of merchandise that teams can bring to a competition?
Something unique, something that no one else has done before, and like we did, follow a trend.
I think a good piece of merchandise is one that someone can take back with them and then they can just use for, months on end. Like a pen. A pen is a great way of doing that. But, you can get cheap Vistaprint pens and they tend to fall apart within, a few weeks. Which isn't a bad option, but I think that's a good indicator of a good piece of merchandise, is something you can take with you and then you can keep using for an extended period of time.
Yeah, and wristbands probably not so much. A lot of them probably just get chucked in the bin.
Yeah, exactly. Especially for sustainability, you want to minimise that sort of stuff.
Yeah, and thanks for bringing that up, Peter. Obviously, with marketing and especially with merchandise and a pit display itself, there's quite a highlighted area of the environmental impact or minimising that. And so a reduction in throwaway items, or perhaps more eco-friendly or environmentally sourced items, could be a benefit to teams if marketed the correct way.
But you could do it where you try and get something that's that is disposable but eco-friendly, and judges might like that, but it's also, you can also make the point that eco-friendly junk is still junk. At the end of the day, it's going to get thrown out, and it's still going to have some environmental impact.
Like say with the pens, you can buy those pens that they're made out of the cardboard tubes, and then you can print your logo on them in environmentally friendly ink. That's one way you can minimise your environmental footprint.
Yeah, brilliant. So obviously, as mentioned previously in this episode, you are required to have specific competition elements displayed on your booth, such as your portfolios. I believe from at least our World Finals, we were required to have at least one engineering enterprise and I believe a marketing document displayed on a booth at all, in quotation marks, at all times. That may have changed, but I think, as mentioned previous, it's a good idea to have all of your major documents displayed on your pits. So that includes things like your marketing documents, your engineering drawings, renders, etc. Anyone have a take on that?
Yeah, if you have we've mentioned this before in the marketing episode, but if you have a brand guide or something of that nature, definitely put that on your pit display and bring it to the attention of the marketing judges as well when they come to see your pit display, because although it's not a required element, it does help with supporting that criteria about your brand and keeping it consistent, and you can actually physically show, right, we had a set of guidelines that helped us keep consistent to our brand, and then you can put that in your pit display to showcase that to the judges.
Yeah, and one thing I saw at our World Finals, and it's been repeated since, is teams having their plus size portfolios. Say for engineering, I believe it was CJJ Auto Vinco. While it was not an official handed in document, they brought along a really in-depth engineering portfolio beyond that of the requirements, and it was great to be able to go to their booth and really have a look through that. And of course they took it to their engineering judging, but it brings up the idea of transparency. So I was talking to Jesse Stevens from Infinitude last week, and he talked about how great it was with the controversy surrounding the Infinitude lures, to be able to have all of the engineering documents at your pit for teams and judges to come up and read through and understand. Peter, can you take that for me?
We had everything on display for everyone to see. We were completely transparent, so we were very upfront about how we designed our car, what we did with our lures, and with the extended canister chamber, etc., etc. So there were no secrets as to how we broke the world record or made our car go fast, etc. It was all there for everyone to see.
There are some times, maybe at the World Finals, where some people from some teams come around asking very specific questions about your car. Like oddly specific questions to the point where you go, are you trying to work out whether we've broken a rule or something? That does happen. But I think usually it is good to be transparent and have your engineering documents ready to go. No, it's all perfectly legal.
With, of course, so many people floating around events such as the World Finals, it is important that you have systems in place to keep not only your intellectual property, but your physical components safe and secure. So in recent years, we've seen teams such as Horizon implement a camera. So they had a GoPro up in, I believe, the top right corner, which was a constant live stream, streaming to not only YouTube, but a local hard drive backup. And the way they explained it is essentially, being such a high-profile team, you have a lot of people not only wanting to take pictures of your portfolios, but really understand and potentially copy a lot of your elements. And so that they felt was the best way. And they said, I was talking to, I believe it was Luke and James post-event, they were actually able to go back through the footage of when they weren't there, and the camera in the corner was a really strong deterrent for teams stealing or taking their ideas and their property.
Yeah, and on security, at the national finals this year in Australia, they had lots of signage up saying you cannot take photos of portfolios and things of that nature. So although there are, official warnings, you can't always trust that people are going to be doing the right thing. Of course, we like to think they are, but there are some people who do like to take pictures without your knowledge, unfortunately.
I think it can be difficult because in some ways, I'm sure there are people that do take a photograph just going, I want to have a chance to read this and understand what makes it good. They're not necessarily going to copy and paste it into their next portfolio, but you can never quite know what they plan to do with the photograph. So it's always good to not leave everything just lying out overnight.
Yeah. There's also nothing really wrong with sharing your portfolio with teams if they ask, or aspects at least of the portfolio, and if you trust them, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, end of the day, it's the team's hard work. It is their discretion of what they choose to share with other people, especially in the case of full documents.
It's your intellectual property. Do with it how you please.
And of course, this goes beyond things such as your documents, because a lot of teams have some pretty complex and expensive pieces of technology implemented into their booth. Obviously, as Matt mentioned earlier, it's pretty hard to steal a TV, but there are quite often things such as iPads, and clearly you don't want anyone to, especially overnight or whatnot, be taking any of these important pieces of technology. So we certainly overnight, or if we were going out for a day trip or wherever it was, if that was happening, we stripped all the laptops and everything from the behind the scenes. But also, unfortunately, we were unlucky enough to have several of our official documents actually taken. Not sure who by. We didn't have the cameras like Horizon did, which would have been fantastic. Luckily, if we may have had the cameras, that may have stopped that issue, but it happened. We were lucky enough to have extras. But we were talking earlier, and someone brought up the idea of having blank placeholder documents for when you cannot be at your booth. So it still presents the same aesthetic as if you have all your nice documents out, but in reality they're useless because they have little to no information in them. Okay, and our next topic is perhaps one of the most formal throughout this entire episode, and it's what content about your pit regarding your pit display needs to be included in your portfolios, clearly to maximise your marks. Currently looking at the 2019 World Finals scorecard for pit displays, and the two main points that I believe need to be included in your portfolio, or the main point, is the pit display design process. So reading directly from this, a range of ideas, a brilliant pit display should have a range of ideas, clearly justified, creative final design, evidence of development, considering factors including team identity, budget, sustainability, and time constraints. And this will score you, for this category, a maximum of 20 points. So, go through the list of... George, do you want to take us through the sort of content that you discussed in your portfolios?
So what we were writing about in our portfolio was we evaluated our national finals pit display, and then we talked about positives and negatives of it. And then we sort of showed 4 different sort of design ideas for possible pit displays, with sort of different ideas, maybe like a walk-in design, a pit wall design, and sort of like a really expensive custom design, and talked about what we wanted in those. And then we've also talked a bit about designing the pit display, getting the measurements of the table right, and the height, so that it's easy to use and easy to see. You're not sort of straining to look at anything. I think we focused on lots of things like that, and then also talking about how we got our branding and the branding of our sponsors to create a return on investment for them. That's mainly what we've focused on in our portfolio. I think it's a bit, because in the bit where it goes enterprise portfolio, it's not quite clear how much you're meant to write about your pit display in the portfolio. So we're always a bit unsure.
Yeah, so we dedicated, whether or not it was the right thing to do, I'd have to look back at the scorecards, but we dedicated an entire page of our portfolio to pit displays. So in essence, we had kicked it off with a design aim, so it had to be light, strong, eye-catching, engaging, and consistent with team branding. They're some of the major points we've discussed throughout this episode. And then we went into a variety of design ideas, or prototypes, if you will, similar to what you do with the car, and explaining the pros and cons for each of those. And then final analysis of our final pit display, and budgeting, and manufacturing construction.
We went through our design process in our page, so we dedicated an entire page to our pit display. We went through our design process. We talked about the materials we used, also the technology we incorporated into our pit display, an assessment of the different materials we were considering, how we incorporated the car into our pit display, and then we've also got pictures displaying the progression of our pit display concepts.
We had 2 pages in our pit display, one dedicated purely to the design, the requirements, the scope, the branding, the safety, and the sustainability. And a second page showed off our prototypes and our final design. So we had a few prototypes, including a walk-in design. But we ultimately went with a different design, a more traditional, whatever it's called.
So in essence, they're asking for a design process. So just as you would present prototypes and development of your car, I believe doing a similar tactic for your booth would also go quite well. That concludes Pit Displays episode 1. Thanks for listening to Off the Track. If you enjoyed this episode, you can rate the show on Apple Podcasts. Make sure to follow us on Instagram at Off the Track Podcast, and visit us at offthetrack.net. We'll be premiering episode 2 of this mini-series coming soon, which will be completely surrounding the construction of your pit displays. So look out for that one on Instagram and in your wherever you get your podcasts. So from all of us at Off the Track, thank you very much for listening. We'll see you next time.